Moving on from Stephen's point about the, I guess the disjunction between the physical world, or the connection of the physical world and the digital world, I just want to quickly use the Google streetcar because I think it's one of my favorite examples of that connection. And we think of them running around taking pictures of street signs and intersections, real analog, real world stuff, digitizing that, putting it up into the cloud and making that information available for things like navigation and building autonomous cars. In my world, DNA sequencing, that exact model is evolving in a very similar way. We take usually a blood sample or a saliva sample, goes into a DNA sequencer, we digitize the information, and these days we upload that information to the cloud where it's processed. And I think of this as, in a sense, the next step of this core competency we have, which is an amazing ability to process digital information right down to the level now of DNA in our cells. The reason we're doing that is something we've nicknamed the molecular stethoscope, which is what happens when you sit with a doctor and that doctor can see your DNA, all 3 billion bases, and see the implications of that DNA as they sit with you and do a diagnosis. Some of the things that enables, personalized prescriptions. Basically, the majority of prescriptions you get these days don't work, so actually making sure that you get the right prescription. Risk-based screening. We shouldn't be screening people who are 50 and over only for cancer. Some people don't need to be scanned at all. Some people need to be scanned very carefully. Hereditary disease can be detected at a very early age and also screened for before people conceive. And also huge activity right now around cancer and cancer therapy. So huge impact from this technology. Because we upload all from our sequences to the cloud, you can see this sped up. This is about 6 months of sequencing worldwide. Wherever you see a flash of red, that's DNA being sequenced somewhere on the planet. And as it comes together, you can see that it's still a very developed country behavior. It's basically North America, Western Europe, and some places in Asia, including Alice Springs in my own country of Australia, and I don't know who's sequencing in Alice Springs, and I'd like to know why that's happening. It's out in the middle of the desert. But the lesson from this is right now it's not evenly distributed across the planet. And so it doesn't really fit with Internet of Things until you look at this. This is 7 years growth of Moore's Law. Moore's Law in the last 7 years improved, let's call it, reduced the cost of computing by a factor of 10. In that same period of time, the cost of doing a whole genome sequencing went from around $10 million to about $1,000, so a factor of 10,000. That trend is going to continue, and genome sequencing is going to become ubiquitous extremely soon.
A lot of the use cases were described, so Cisco, we at Cisco, we have been also busy with the Internet of Things and Internet of Everything that we call the brand in this area. And we've been working with Intel and other partners on this area. And what we found out is that as we are making the physical world into digital, as Steve already talked about, we are digitalizing everything, whether sensor or everything, we're collecting all this data. What you begin to understand is that it's not going as fast as you would have wished, right? Gartner recently published that IoT is at the hype of the curve. So, and it's going to become productive in 5+ years. And why is that? It's because of what Steve talked about at the end. It was about outcome. What does it do to business? We all know that if we digitize it and if we collect data and if we automate and machine learning will do a great job. But what it requires is business outcome. So we had to look from the technology to more from the business perspective. What does it do to a line of business? What you do today, how would it help with Internet of Things? If you start from that baby steps, then people will get used to it. Otherwise, the jump, some of the videos that you saw, you might think, come on, this is not going to happen anytime soon because the gap is too big. It's going to happen, but we have to go through step-by-step process. So that's what we started taking a step back and saying, let's look at the outcome-based. And I will talk also about the collaborative economy, shared economy. A lot of people say you look at Airbnb, Zipcar. This is another area that is growing a lot, where basically not everybody is building the infrastructure for themselves. Now imagine 50 billion devices or trillion devices, and everybody's building their own infrastructure. It doesn't economically make sense. So how do you use some of the infrastructure, some of the capability that you're building and sharing with others? So the concept of collaborative economy and Internet of Things as a service, because that's the monetization model or the consumption model where it's moving from a CapEx to a more of an OpEx. If you have to pay by month, it's much more easier than investing ten thousands of dollars. Give you an example here, just I'll quickly, street lighting as a service. You have a typical pole which can cost, a light pole is about $10,000 to $15,000 from cradle to grave installation and everything, and the city still has to pay for utility, maintenance, and all those kind of things. Now what you're beginning to see is lighting as a service coming in, where basically the light companies are installing those light poles, and the city only has to pay less than $100 a month. That includes utility costs, that includes maintenance. It's SLA driven. And this lighting company can now use that pole even as a physical pole as a service for mobile operators to put their antennas on top and charge couple of $100 per month. They're also putting video surveillance to do surveillance as a service. So the concept of lighting as a service, so whoever is putting the infrastructure is now able to leverage beyond its own core business. So they can now go from lighting as a service to pole as a service to video surveillance as a service to traffic as a service. So a lot of those things are happening in this area. And these are all fueled by, at the bottom, if you see the common trend between the collaborative economy and IoT services are all about savings, getting more green, cost savings, connectivity costs coming down. So you can read this. So this is basically what's basically driving. What is the technology behind it? And I want to take a step back, that it's not about digital era. We have been the generation of digital era, not the generation of my daughter. She is 13 and she doesn't think about digital era, she thinks about data, everything should be served to her. So I started thinking about what is this internet era and Internet of Things era. They gotta be different. So in the internet era, we had things to do with connectivity, and then we had convergence towards IP. We had all different kind of connectivity protocol, convergence, and there were a lot of content. And from that, we are moving into a data native life or data era where contextual, meaningful data has to. It's the information of the data that matters, not the amount of data. It is the relevance of the data that matters and not the data itself. So there you will see that different companies are coming with siloed platform, and the ability for someone to create a marketplace and have a broker of data services and create a marketplace where different silos, information from my Nike fuel band to my smartphone to my car can all be connected together. So that's a different economy on its own. So
recently, at Purdue University, I got asked to speak at something called Dawn or Doom. And this Dawn or Doom was this effort and this big symposium put on by our president, who was the former governor of the state of Indiana, after he read a book by a guy named James Barat. The whole idea was, do these things like IoT and AI and all these things we have coming up, will they create a new dawn of great financial wealth and human joy and jubilation, or will they be the doom? Now, the great thing is, I guess, we had a meeting with the president, and we said, what should we emphasize, the dawn or the doom? And he says, well, doom sells, so sell the doom. So I guess being the harbinger of death for all things of humanity. What I really work on and what I'm interested in is transitioning from human organizations. I do a lot of work in robotics and AI, and before I was at Purdue, I spent lots of years in industry with AT&T and Schneider Electric doing AI in the applied sense. But what we're really looking at is how can we make robotic societal interaction ubiquitous? We already know the age of devices and ubiquitous technology being around us that's non-human. It's somewhat already here because we're all glued to our cell phones. Tomorrow we'll all be glued to our cell phones and our vacuums and all the other devices that govern our lives. But if we look at, in our view of human agents, robots, machines, and sensors, these are the things we care about. But what we're really interested in is the indistinguishability. Right now I work in a human organization, which is a university. But in the future, I know that that's going to change. The organization I work with will be not only humans, but will have machines, robots, and other kind of devices. So we're really looking at the indistinguishability. Do I care who does something as long as they have the capability to do it? It could be, It could be a machine, it could be my refrigerator, it could be a robot, it could be a cyborg. So soon we'll have a mixed, heterogeneous set of devices that will be involved in every part of our life. Now, what I'm really interested in is that we don't just look at IoT, and we look at this sort of digital life. And most IoT right now is really concerned about the networking and the basic communication level. But I'm more interested in, okay, what goes beyond that? We have interaction. I want to make rational decisions about going to a movie with a robot. Can I do that? Actually, we can. So we have kind of this layered model. The first two are kind of the standard IoT, but we have interaction. How do we just make decisions as a big group? Can I make a decision involving a sensor, a robot, a car, and an electronic dog? Once we can do that, we can organize. We can organize into human-like organizations where people are taken out of danger and people are only kept in the loop for something like making a decision about something that non-humans can't. And finally, collective intelligence. Can we take a bunch of mixed mode, mixed device and human organizations and make them have things like norms approved? You know, I go to Korea a lot. Cultural norms in Asia are very different than they are in the US. Those are emergent. They aren't planned, they're not engineered, but they're emergent. How will this work when we have a ubiquitous set of not only humans, but also humans mixed with robots, devices, and everything else?
Yeah, so we already have heard quite a lot today, I think, about the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things also has a great potential for manufacturing and production. So after electrification, automation, communication, we really see the Internet of Things as the fourth industrial revolution for production manufacturing. So machines and sensors suddenly can communicate with each other, and more importantly, also across categories. So we really have a sensor talking to a conveyor belt, having products talking maybe to the drilling machine, and having gateways maybe talking to the service person. So the IoT has the potential to really transform the factories of the future. So our world already today is instrumented with sensors that produce vast amounts of data. This allows to harvest massive amounts of data and evaluate those in the cloud, but the devices are still dumb, so the processing is still happening in the cloud. So now, in order to fully leverage the Internet of Things, it's really the goal to make the devices talking and communicating directly with each other. So this actually means they need to speak the same language. So what I mentioned before, the sensor, the conveyor belt, these are different categories of machines. So what really needs to be developed is a common layer that allows to share data and to semantically describe what these different devices are actually requiring. So taking an example of a factory here. So in case of a clogged pump, the flow meter can approach the pump and ask it to increase the pressure and then keep the flow going while maybe simultaneously asking for a service worker to do the maintenance. So this is a scenario which can be solved locally in real time without requiring a connectivity to a cloud. And this only becomes possible if the devices are self-aware and have the capability to share their needs and share their characteristics. So the Web of Things group I'm leading for Siemens in Berkeley is working together with academic partners and startups to leverage web technologies and semantic technologies and bringing those to machines and allowing to leverage the potential of the IoT and enabling machines, in addition to the cloud operation of today, also to directly collaborate with each other and to communicate across these device categories.
When Bashir reached out to me and asked me to think about this topic, this is the image that came to my mind right away. And if we think back on the theme of actually the whole day, and one of the questions we asked is, how are business people supposed to relate to all these academics, all these research ideas, all these very in-depth technology presentations? And one of the things I love about the Power by the Hour example is that it reminds us of one of the core dynamics of these systems that we're instrumenting, is that through instrumentation and better data, we're able to optimize performance. And there's actually a shift of risk, in this case, from the airline that used to have to buy aircraft engines and then operate it, so they had the variability of that cost, to where a little bit like Mababul was saying, so in the case of a jet engine today, airlines buy those on a power-by-the-hour basis. And so another way of phrasing our panel's job, and actually a question to each of you coming from industry, is, where you don't have products that warrant a $20 million investment like a jet engine does, and maybe you can't afford 5,000 sensors like GE can in today's jet engines, but if you took those same principles, how might you apply them to your businesses? And we have some startups here in the room, and just the good news from this example is it wasn't Rolls-Royce which patented the power-by-the-hour phrase, but it was after a startup British engine manufacturer that made a business jet engine called the Viper, that they were the ones who created the model that now has shifted the way the entire industry functions. So if we take that general concept, in my current work at MIT, we've been taking some of the history of the auto ID labs, working all over the world on a common system for identifying things uniquely, which is, after all, one of the fundamental principles of the internet, is that everything has a unique address. It turns out, as each one of the speakers on this panel has indicated, that actually the world is pretty complicated, and it's pretty hard to make these systems work. And actually, Florian and I both at different times have worked in academic labs all over the world with different industry groups, with governments freeing up frequencies, and then working with unique identification systems, either the optical barcodes or the radio frequency systems, to try to exchange information about things. And actually, this slide was taken from an Abidar presentation. He's the CTO of Walgreens, and he presented at a big data conference we had on campus. And one of the things that reminds us is that the big data isn't the data we have in our big OLTP databases. The big data is what's happening out there. And then the challenge is, where do we find a process that we can instrument with some protocol that can be replicated and scaled? And so in a translational medicine grant that was picked up by MIT News this year, I collaborate with a group that established the best practices for EMAR, for electronic medication administration. So it turns out if you scan with a barcode reader, a patient ID and then a product ID, and look it up in a database, you can prevent, in the case of the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, they prevent 200,000 adverse medication events a year using that system. And what you see here is a picture of a nurse with these big computers on wheels, and then they have a $600 dedicated barcode reader on top of that they use to perform this. And so in our recent proof of concept with the translational medicine grant, we used an HF RFID reader that's built into your smartphones to do the same thing. But of course, for this to scale, getting agreement, getting the right, so part of the opportunity in a forum like this is to say, if we take a process, who needs to be around the table? What regulatory authorities, federal, state, international, what medical authorities, what specialties, how do we make these systems work? And then the second example from another MIT News story, at the Center for Biomedical Innovation, where I've been spending the bulk of my time, this is the major biomanufacturers in the world who are sitting and road mapping where manufacturing is going. And just in the backdrop there, many of you will recognize the move from discrete to continuous flow manufacturing, from centralized manufacturing to distributed manufacturing. So these are changing whether we're in research labs or building cars. But one of the fundamental technologies where we're getting data from is technologies like Illumina, where whether in genomics or proteomics or metabolomics or the human biome, all of a sudden we have huge troves of data. But to actually exploit this and make it useful, we'll need the same sorts of defined interfaces and harmonized data structures and processes, a little bit like what Florian was talking about, in order to actually make use of this data to create better science and hopefully to optimize systems and create better outcomes.